Welcome to Fright Nest, where the shadows come alive and every creak in the night hides a story waiting to be told. In this tale, reality blurs with nightmare, and by the end, you might find yourself questioning what's real and what's lurking just beyond your sight. Prepare yourself, because once you enter, there's no turning back. Now that the darkness has settled and the silence has grown heavy, it is time to dive into the story of the terrifying night. Prepare yourself, because this is where the ordinary turns into the unimaginable, and every step forward leads deeper into the unknown. Our story today is... It was the night of October 31st, Halloween, when the air was thick with the chill of approaching winter. Back then, my parents were still together, and they had a rule to split my siblings and me between them for trick-or-treating. I went with my dad along with my younger sister, while my brother and other sister went with my mom. My dad had this brilliant idea to take us to a neighborhood known for its extravagant houses and over-the-top decorations. I called up my friend Aubrey, and she agreed to join us. When we arrived, the streets were lined with spooky, elaborately decorated homes. Aubrey and I, driven by our youthful excitement, ran ahead to collect as much candy as possible. We wandered further and further until the lively crowds of kids started to thin out. The festive laughter and chatter dwindled into an eerie silence. As we moved deeper into the neighborhood, the air seemed to grow colder and thicker, almost suffocating. Suddenly we heard a chilling scraping sound, like metal dragging against the pavement. We turned to see a figure in a grotesque clown costume holding a bat with sharp nails embedded in it. The clown's mask was twisted into an unnatural grin, eyes glowing ominously in the dim streetlight. Fear clawed at my insides as we quickened our pace, but the clown started to move faster too. His heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed in the empty street. Panic surged through us. We broke into a sprint, our breaths coming out in ragged gasps. The clown's manic laughter and the sound of his bat scraping the ground followed us relentlessly. The street seemed to stretch endlessly, a labyrinth of terror. We glanced back and saw the clown was now sprinting towards us, his bat raised menacingly. In our frantic flight, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned house at the end of the road. With no other choice, we dashed into the decrepit building, hoping to find refuge from the nightmare. Inside, the house was dark and filled with cobwebs, the floorboards creaking under our feet. We hid in a small closet, trying to calm our ragged breaths and praying the clown wouldn't find us. Through the small gaps in the closet door, we watched as the clown entered the house, his grotesque mask illuminated by the flickering streetlight through the broken windows. He moved slowly, methodically, searching each room with his bat scraping the walls, leaving deep gouges. Our hearts pounded in our chests, the terror nearly paralyzing. Suddenly, his masked face appeared at the closet door. He raised his bat, and just as he was about to swing, a loud siren blared outside, startling him. He turned and fled, leaving us trembling in the closet. We stayed hidden for what felt like hours before we dared to move. Finally, we found the courage to leave the house and run back to the street where we found my dad, our faces pale with fear. That night left a scar on my soul, and clowns have haunted my nightmares ever since. Aubrey and I still talk about that horrific Halloween, a night that turned from festive fun to sheer terror. I've always had an uncanny knack for attracting the paranormal, a trait I never asked for but couldn't seem to escape. Shadows that darted in the corners of my vision, whispers that had no source, they were a constant in my life. But in the fall of 2009, something happened that would forever leave a mark on my psyche. I was 15 and had been invited to my first and only Halloween party by a friend. She had invited 6 other girls, and her younger sister had her own group of friends over. We went trick-or-treating, but the night had been uneventful, save for a few awkward encounters with boys from school. When we returned to my friend's house, the older girls, including myself, retreated to her room while the younger ones played outside on the swing set. The night air was biting, and the darkness had an eerie quality to it. I felt a sense of foreboding as I stood on the deck, watching the younger girls play. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the night silence. One of the younger girls came bolting inside, followed closely by my friend's sister and the rest of the younger girls. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with terror. We huddled in my friend's room, a sense of dread filling the air. My friend was asked to go upstairs and check on the girl who had screamed. When she returned, her face was ashen, her voice trembling as she asked me to come with her. She explained that because of my experience with the paranormal, I was the best person to help. At the top of the stairs, we found the girl sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, crying. Her whole body shook with fear. She told us that while on the swing facing the woods, she had felt a strange and unsettling presence. She described hearing a low growl and seeing two bright red eyes staring back at her from the darkness. The growling grew louder, reverberating through the trees, and she saw the red eyes getting closer, almost glowing with a malevolent intent. She screamed and ran inside, her heart pounding in her chest, consumed by fear. I told her that I had felt a similar unsettling presence near the woods earlier that night, which is why I had come inside. To help her calm down, I explained that I could perform a simple protection ritual, something I had learned from my readings on witchcraft and paranormal activities. We called her grandmother to come pick her up, and while we waited, the rest of us decided to watch some TV shows to distract ourselves from the eerie events. But the night was far from over. As I walked back into the living room, I found her sitting under the window facing the front yard, her head resting in her arms, looking even more distressed. She told me, voice shaking, that she had seen a figure standing on the street, the same bright red eyes staring at her. Her fear was palpable. When her grandmother finally arrived, my friend's dad walked her out to the car, offering comforting words. I returned to the movie, trying to shake off the creeping dread that had settled over me. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up with a full bladder and went to use the upstairs bathroom. However, something seemed to pull me towards the living room, an inexplicable force. The living room had a sliding door leading to a Four Seasons room with windows all around. As soon as I stepped into the room, a wave of fear washed over me. Outside, at the edge of the woods, I saw a shadowy figure with those same piercing red eyes and ram-like horns on its head, staring right at me. Terrified, I ran down the stairs so fast I nearly fell. By morning, we all agreed it was best not to talk about what had happened, but the image of that figure haunted me. In the following weeks, I grew closer to the girl who had seen the figure first. We shared our experiences, trying to piece together what we had encountered. One day, while researching at the local library, a boy from our school approached us. He admitted he had seen the same figure that night, with the exact same red eyes. We realized the figure had appeared to each of us at different times, always 2 hours apart, starting with the youngest. Despite the terror, this experience bound us together, though it also left us with more questions than answers. Even now, we wonder what we truly saw that night and why it chose to reveal itself to us. This took place in 2015 when I was around 13. Even though I was a bit too old for trick-or-treating, my friends and I decided to do it anyway. We lived in a safe neighborhood, so we didn't need our parents with us. There was a row of houses that always went all out with decorations every year. Usually, they made their homes look like scenes from Pirates of the Caribbean. But this year, they chose different horror movie themes. One house stood out. It was themed after the Jason movies. The decorations were minimal, and the lights were off. Instead, there was a man outside, pretending to trim the bushes with a fake chainsaw. I recognized the girl who lived there, but the man wasn't her father. I assumed he was her older brother, whom I had heard about but never met. It was creepy, but we expected some scares. It was Halloween, after all. He would turn on the chainsaw and walk around, laughing maniacally. We were leaving the house across the street when he suddenly stopped and stared at us from across the road. His presence gave me chills. I tried to laugh it off, but the atmosphere felt off, like a silent threat lingering in the air. 10 minutes later, we saw him again on a different street. It was around 10:45 and we decided it was time to go home. We split up and I started walking alone. As I walked, a strange feeling crept over me. I turned around and saw the man with the chainsaw standing among some people, about 6 houses back. He didn't seem to notice me, so I continued walking, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. About 12 years ago, when I was around 16, I was living in a small, isolated town. One Saturday night, around midnight, I was driving my friend home after an evening spent together. My friend lived far out in the countryside, and to get there, I had to navigate long, winding roads that were devoid of streetlights or houses. Both sides of the road were lined with dense forests and empty fields, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. I always hated dropping her off at night because the drive back made me feel incredibly nervous and uneasy. The darkness felt alive, pressing in from all sides, and the silence was almost suffocating. Maybe it was because of the countless horror movies I had watched, but I couldn't help imagining all the terrible things that could happen in such isolation. But it was my turn to drive, so I had no choice. After dropping her off, I drove back, being extra careful, not just because of my fear, but because there could be drunk drivers on these lonely roads. I turned left onto the last small street before reaching the main road. This street had 2 large curves that you had to take slowly because they were wide and came one after the other. As I approached the first curve, I slowed down and noticed 3 figures dressed in black walking in the middle of the road, taking up the entire lane. At first, it was hard to see them because of their dark clothing, which frustrated and alarmed me. I thought they were just some careless teenagers, not thinking about how dangerous it was to walk in the road like that at night. I didn't want to stay behind them for long, so I sped up to pass them by switching to the other lane, hoping no car would come from the opposite direction. As I drove past them, I glanced out my side window to see their faces. That's when I realized they were all wearing the same creepy gray skull masks. They stared at me with hollow, unblinking eyes as I drove by. If it had been close to Halloween, I might have thought they were just getting into the spirit of the holiday. But this happened in May. There was something incredibly unsettling about the situation. It didn't seem like the teenagers were trying to scare me off the road. They didn't even look back when I first approached. It felt too bizarre, so I decided to call the police to report what I had seen. They called me back shortly after, saying they had sent an officer to the spot I described. However, when the officer arrived, they found no one walking on the road or even on its sides. What really creeped me out was that there was nowhere for the 3 people to hide. This street had open land on both sides, empty fields with no trees or bushes nearby. There were also no side streets they could have turned onto to escape the police. It was as if they had simply vanished. You've survived, for now. But beware, Fright Nest never sleeps. The horrors here will haunt you long after the video ends. So when you're ready for more nightmares, return to the nest. If you dare, we'll be waiting in the dark.